There's a reason why some people seem unshakable while others crumble at the slightest challenge. Carl Jung, one of the most brilliant minds in psychology, discovered something profound about human consciousness. He found that spiritually mature individuals, those who've done the deep inner work, operate on an entirely different frequency than most people. They don't just react to life. They respond with intention. They don't just survive. They thrive with purpose. But here's what's fascinating. It's not about what they do that makes them different. It's about what they absolutely refuse to tolerate. Today, we're diving deep into 15 things that spiritually mature people, guided by Jungian psychology, will never allow in their lives. And I guarantee, by the end of this video, you'll understand why your boundaries might be the key to your spiritual awakening. If you're ready to elevate your consciousness and step into your highest self, stay with me until the end. Let's begin. Before we dive in, let me ask you something. Have you ever felt like you're tolerating things in your life that drain your energy? Relationships that feel heavy? Situations that compromise who you truly are? Carl Jung believed that the journey to individuation, becoming your true self, requires radical honesty and fierce boundaries. He said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. Today's video is about making the unconscious conscious. It's about recognizing what spiritually mature people refuse to accept, so you can reclaim your power. And hey, if you're new here, welcome to the community. We explore deep psychological wisdom, spiritual growth, and practical ways to transform your life. Make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you don't miss any content. Now let's get into it. Part 1. Boundaries with Self. 1. They never tolerate self-betrayal. Let's start with the most fundamental boundary, the one you have with yourself. Jung spoke extensively about the shadow, the parts of ourselves we deny, repress, or refuse to acknowledge. Spiritually mature people understand that self-betrayal is the ultimate wound. What is self-betrayal? It's saying yes when you mean no. It's dimming your light to make others comfortable. It's ignoring your intuition because you're afraid of judgment. It's staying in situations that violate your values because leaving feels too hard. Jung said, the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely, but spiritually mature people do exactly that. They honor their truth, even when it's inconvenient. Real-life example. Imagine you're offered a high-paying job that requires you to compromise your ethics. The old you might rationalize it. Everyone does it. I need the money. But someone who's spiritually mature, they walk away. Not out of pride, but out of deep self-respect. Why this matters. Every time you betray yourself, you create an internal fracture. You tell your subconscious that your needs don't matter. Over time, this leads to depression, anxiety, and a profound sense of emptiness. The practice. Start small. Notice where you're betraying yourself daily. Is it in the conversations you're having? The boundaries you're not setting? The dreams you're not pursuing? Write this down. I honor my truth even when it's difficult. Make this your daily affirmation. Watch how your life transforms when you stop abandoning yourself. 2. They never tolerate spiritual bypassing. Here's a trap many people fall into on the spiritual path. Spiritual bypassing. This term, popularized by psychologist John Wellwood, refers to using spiritual practices to avoid dealing with uncomfortable feelings, unresolved wounds, or psychological issues. What does this look like? Saying everything happens for a reason to avoid processing trauma. Using positive affirmations to suppress legitimate anger or grief. Bypassing shadow work with toxic positivity. Escaping into meditation instead of addressing real-life problems. Jung would have called this avoiding the shadow. And spiritually mature people, they see right through it. The Jungian perspective. Jung believed that true spiritual growth requires integrating all parts of yourself, the light and the dark. He said, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. You can't transcend what you refuse to face. Real-life example. Consider someone who constantly says they've forgiven someone who hurt them, but they're still triggered every time that person's name comes up. That's spiritual bypassing. True forgiveness requires processing the pain first. The antidote. Spiritually mature people do the messy work. They sit with uncomfortable emotions. They go to therapy. They journal about their darkness. They understand that spiritual growth isn't about ascending above humanity. It's about becoming fully human. Ask yourself, where am I using spirituality to avoid discomfort? What emotions am I bypassing with affirmations? What shadows am I refusing to face? True spiritual maturity means having the courage to feel everything, integrate everything, and transform everything. 3. They never tolerate victim mentality. Now, this is a sensitive one, so let me be clear. Acknowledging that you've been victimized is not the same as having a victim mentality. The difference: being victimized is something that happened to you. Victim mentality is a perpetual state of powerlessness that you choose to live in. Jung understood this deeply. He spoke about the importance of taking radical responsibility for your psychological state, not because everything is your fault, but because your response is always your power. What victim mentality looks like: believing life is happening to you, not for you, blaming others for your circumstances without taking any action, using past trauma as an excuse to avoid growth, refusing to see your role in repeated patterns. The Jungian insight. Jung said, "I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become." Spiritually mature people acknowledge their wounds, but they don't build their identity around them. They understand that healing requires moving from "why did this happen to me" to "what can I learn from this?" The transformation. This doesn't mean denying pain or pretending trauma doesn't matter. It means reclaiming your agency. It means recognizing that while you can't control what happened, you can control how you integrate it into your story. Practical application. Next time you catch yourself in victim language, pause. Reframe the narrative. Instead of, "They ruined my life," try, "That was painful, and now I choose how to rebuild." Instead of, "I can't because," try, "It's challenging, but I'm finding a way." Instead of, "Why does this always happen to me?" try, "What pattern am I ready to break?" This shift is everything. It's the difference between being a passenger in your life and being the driver. Part 2, boundaries in relationships. 4, they never tolerate energetic vampires. Jung didn't use the term energetic vampire, but he absolutely understood the concept. Through his work on projection and the collective unconscious, what is an energetic vampire? Someone who consistently drains your energy, vitality, and peace. They're not necessarily bad people, but they operate from such a low frequency that being around them leaves you depleted. Common traits: constant complaining without taking action, drama creation and crisis addiction, making everything about themselves, refusing to take responsibility for their emotions, demanding your attention but never reciprocating. The Jungian connection. Jung believed that unintegrated aspects of people's psyches get projected onto others. Energetic vampires are often people who haven't done their shadow work, so they unconsciously feed off others' energy to avoid facing their own emptiness. Why spiritually mature people don't tolerate this? Not out of judgment, but out of self-preservation. They understand that you can't pour from an empty cup. They recognize that enabling this dynamic doesn't help anyone. It actually prevents the other person from doing their own inner work. The boundary. This doesn't mean abandoning people who are struggling. It means recognizing the difference between supporting someone through a hard time and being someone's emotional dumping ground. How to implement. 1. Notice how you feel after spending time with someone. 2. If you're consistently drained, assess the relationship. 3. Set clear boundaries around your time and energy. 4. Limit exposure to people who refuse to help themselves. 5. Surround yourself with people who energize and inspire you. Jung said, "The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. Make sure your relationships are transforming you in positive ways." They never tolerate manipulation or gaslighting. Here's where Jungian psychology gets really powerful in understanding toxic dynamics. What is gaslighting? It's a form of psychological manipulation where someone makes you question your own reality, memory, or perceptions. It's insidious because it targets your trust in yourself. The Jungian perspective. Jung believed that knowing yourself, your thoughts, feelings, and perceptions is the foundation of psychological health. He called this process individuation. Gaslighting is the complete opposite. It's the erosion of your sense of self. Common gaslighting phrases, "That never happened," "You're too sensitive," "You're remembering it wrong," "Everyone thinks you're crazy," "I never said that." Why spiritually mature people don't tolerate this? Because they've done the work to know themselves. They trust their intuition. They've integrated their shadow enough to distinguish between their projections and actual manipulation. When someone tries to gaslight them, they don't question themselves. They question the person trying to distort their reality. The response? Spiritually mature people don't engage in endless debates about what's real. They simply state their truth and walk away if necessary. They understand that you can't logic someone out of a position they didn't logic themselves into. Personal practice. Keep a journal to document patterns and events. Trust your gut feelings, especially repeated ones. Seek outside perspectives when you feel confused. Remove yourself from relationships that consistently make you doubt yourself. Jung said, "Knowing your own darkness is the best method for dealing with the darknesses of other people. When you know yourself, you become unmanipulatable." 6. They never tolerate one-sided relationships. Jung understood reciprocity as a fundamental principle of psychological health. What is a one-sided relationship? It's any connection where the energy exchange is consistently imbalanced. One person is always giving, supporting, initiating, and sacrificing, while the other is always taking, receiving, and benefiting. Why this matters psychologically? According to Jung, healthy relationships require both parties to be conscious participants. When one person is doing all the work, it creates what he would call a participation mystique, an unconscious fusion where both people lose their individuality. The giver loses themselves in the role of caretaker, rescuer, or supporter. The taker never develops their own inner resources because they're always being enabled. Signs of one-sided relationships. You're always the one reaching out. Your needs are consistently ignored or minimized. You feel exhausted after interactions. There's no curiosity about your life. You feel more like a therapist than a friend. The spiritually mature response. They step back, not with resentment, but with clarity. They understand that real love, whether romantic, platonic, or familial, requires mutual investment. The practice. Try this experiment. Step back from a relationship for a week. Don't initiate. Don't chase. Just see what happens. If the relationship dissolves completely, it was one-sided. If the other person notices and reaches out, there's something real there. This isn't playing games, it's gathering information about the reality of your connections. 7. They never tolerate people-pleasing behavior. Here's a plot twist. Spiritually, mature people don't tolerate people-pleasing in themselves or in others. Wait, what? Jung identified the persona as the mask we wear for the world, the socially acceptable version of ourselves. People-pleasing is when the persona completely overtakes the authentic self. Why people please? Fear of rejection or abandonment, conditional love in childhood, unhealed wounds around worthiness, belief that their value comes from what they do for others. The problem, people-pleasing isn't kindness, it's manipulation. It's trying to control how others perceive you by abandoning your authentic self. And ironically, it breeds resentment in both parties. Jung's insight. He said, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. But you can't become who you truly are if you're constantly performing who you think others want you to be. Why spiritually mature people don't tolerate this? Because they've learned that authenticity creates deeper connections than performance ever could. They'd rather be respected for who they are than loved for who they're not. And they don't tolerate it in others because they understand that when someone is people-pleasing, you're not actually connecting with them. You're connecting with their persona, their mask. The transformation. Start saying no without explanation. Not to be rude, but to honor your truth. No, that doesn't work for me. No, I'm not available. No, I'm choosing differently. Watch how many relationships remain when you stop performing. Those are your real connections. Part 3. Boundaries with society and culture. 8. They never tolerate living someone else's life. This is where Jung's concept of individuation becomes absolutely critical. What is individuation? It's the process of becoming your true self, separate from collective expectations, parental conditioning, and societal programming. The problem most people face: they're living scripts written by their parents' unfulfilled dreams, society's definition of success, cultural expectations about who they should be, their peer group's values and priorities. Jung's warning. He said, "The greatest tragedy of the family is the unlived lives of the parents." Parents often unconsciously pressure their children to fulfill the dreams they abandoned. Society does the same on a larger scale. What this looks like: choosing a career because it's practical, not because it lights you up. Staying in a relationship because you're supposed to. Following life milestones, marriage, house, kids, without questioning if you actually want them. Suppressing your true interests because they're not acceptable. The spiritually mature approach. They ruthlessly examine their life and ask, is this my desire? Or is this something I internalized from others? This is terrifying work because it requires potentially disappointing people you love. But Jung believed this is non-negotiable for psychological health. The practice. Make 2 lists. List 1, things I'm doing in my life. List 2. Next to each item, write whose voice I hear when I think about it. Is it your voice? Your mother's? Your father's? Society's? Now ask, if I knew no one would judge me, what would I do differently? That answer is your path to individuation. 9. They never tolerate collective unconsciousness. Jung's most profound contribution might be his concept of the collective unconscious, the shared psychological inheritance of humanity. But here's what most people miss. The collective unconscious contains both profound wisdom, archetypes, universal truths, and collective shadow, unexamined prejudices, groupthink, mass delusions. What is collective unconsciousness? Living on autopilot according to cultural programming without examination. Following trends, beliefs, and behaviors simply because everyone else does. Examples: consuming mindlessly because it's normalized, holding prejudices you've never questioned, following political or religious beliefs you've never examined, participating in systems that contradict your values, conforming to social norms that don't serve you. Jung's perspective. He believed that most people are asleep, operating from unconscious patterns inherited from the collective. True spiritual maturity requires waking up. He said, thinking is difficult, that's why most people judge. The spiritually mature response: they question everything, not in a cynical way, but in a curious way. They ask, why do I believe this? Is this actually true, or is this just what I've been told? Does this align with my direct experience? Am I thinking for myself or repeating what I've heard? The danger of the unconscious collective. History shows us repeatedly what happens when masses of people operate unconsciously: wars, genocides, environmental destruction, systemic oppression. Your responsibility: wake up, become conscious, think for yourself. Jung believed this is how we evolve as a species, one awakened individual at a time. 10. They never tolerate meaningless busyness. Modern culture glorifies busyness, but Jung would have called this collective neurosis. The problem: people fill every moment with activity, distraction, and productivity, not because they love what they're doing, but because they're terrified of stillness. Why? Because stillness brings you face to face with yourself, with your shadow, with your unlived life, with your existential questions. Jung's insight. He said, your vision will become clear only when you can look into your own heart. Who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakes. But you can't look inside if you're constantly busy looking outside. What meaningless busyness looks like. scheduling every moment to avoid being alone with your thoughts, equating productivity with worth, using work as an escape from emotional issues, confusing motion with progress, never having time for what actually matters. The spiritually mature approach. They fiercely protect their time for what Jung called active imagination, contemplation, reflection, creativity, and inner work. They understand that the most important insights don't come from doing more. They come from creating space to be. The practice. Schedule nothing time in your calendar. Not self-care activities, not meditation, not productive hobbies. Literally nothing. Sit, walk, stare out the window, be bored. Watch what emerges when you're not running from yourself. That's where your genius lives. That's where your truth speaks. That's where transformation happens. Part 4. Boundaries with the ego and shadow. 11. They never tolerate unexamined projections. This is advanced-level Jungian psychology, so stay with me. What is psychological projection? It's when you unconsciously attribute your own unacknowledged traits, feelings, or desires onto someone else. Jung's explanation. He said, everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. That person who annoys you, they're showing you your shadow. That person you're obsessed with, they're reflecting your unlived potential. Common projections. Judging someone as arrogant when you're suppressing your own power. Calling someone selfish when you're not honoring your own needs. Being triggered by someone's success when you're afraid of your own. Criticizing someone's vulnerability when you're afraid to be vulnerable. Why spiritually mature people don't tolerate this? Because they've done enough inner work to recognize when they're projecting. When they feel triggered, their first question isn't what's wrong with them. It's what is this showing me about me? The transformation. This completely changes your relationships. Instead of blaming and judging, you use every trigger as a mirror for self-discovery. But on the other side of those difficult choices, freedom, authenticity, peace, purpose. Your journey starts now. Pick one thing from this list that resonated most with you. Just one. And commit to no longer tolerating it in your life. Notice what shifts. Notice who you become. Notice how your reality transforms when you refuse to compromise your spiritual integrity. Before you go, if this video impacted you, please like it and share it with someone who needs to hear this message. Subscribe to the channel for more deep dives into psychology, spirituality, and personal transformation. Drop a comment below telling me, which of these 15 things resonated most with you? What are you no longer willing to tolerate? I read every comment and I'd love to hear from you. Remember, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. Don't tolerate anything less. Until next time, keep doing the inner work. Keep growing. Keep becoming. I'll see you in the next video. The practice. Next time someone triggers you, try this. Notice the emotion, anger, jealousy, disgust, etc. 2. Identify the specific trait that bothers you. 3. Ask, where am I rejecting this trait in myself? 4. Ask, where do I secretly want to express this trait? 5. Integrate the lesson instead of externalizing the blame. This is shadow work at its finest, and it's how spiritually mature people continuously evolve. 12. They never tolerate ego inflation or deflation. Jung made a critical distinction between the ego and the self. The ego is your conscious identity, who you think you are. The self is your total being, who you actually are, including unconscious aspects. The problem of ego inflation. This is when someone identifies entirely with their accomplishments, persona, or positive qualities. They think they are the source of their power. Signs, grandiosity, narcissism, inability to accept feedback, believing you're special or above others. The problem of ego deflation. This is the opposite. Complete identification with your wounds, failures, or negative qualities. Chronic low self-esteem and unworthiness. Signs, self-deprecation, imposter syndrome, inability to accept compliments, believing you're fundamentally flawed. Jung's perspective. He said, the ego stands to the self as the move to the mover. In other words, you are not the source of your life force. You are the vessel through which it flows. the spiritually mature approach. They maintain what Jung called ego-self axis, a healthy relationship between the conscious ego and the deeper self. They're neither inflated, believing they're God, nor deflated, believing they're worthless. They're grounded in the truth. They're human, flawed, and simultaneously connected to something greater. The practice. When you succeed, I'm grateful this flowed through me. When you fail, this doesn't define my worth. This balanced perspective is liberating. You're neither taking too much credit nor too much blame. You're simply being human. Part 5. Boundaries with life itself. 13. They never tolerate resisting transformation. Jung believed that psychological growth requires periodic death and rebirth. What he meant. Throughout life, we must repeatedly die to old versions of ourselves to be reborn into new ones. This is the process of individuation. The problem, most people resist this. They cling to outdated identities, relationships, beliefs, and patterns because change is terrifying. Jung's insight. He said there is no coming to consciousness without pain. Growth requires letting go of what's familiar, even if it's not serving you. It requires moving through the unknown. It requires trust. What resisting transformation looks like. Staying in situations that no longer fit. Refusing to release old identities. Avoiding necessary endings. Clinging to comfort over growth. Fearing the unknown more than stagnation. The spiritually mature approach. They embrace the death-rebirth cycle. When they feel the call to transform, they don't resist. They lean in. They understand that every ending is a beginning. Every loss creates space for something new. Every breakdown precedes a breakthrough. Real-life examples. Leaving a career you've identified with for decades. Ending a relationship that's no longer aligned. Moving away from your hometown. Changing belief systems. Releasing who you thought you'd become. The practice. Ask yourself, what part of me is ready to die so a new part can be born? This isn't morbid, it's life-affirming. It's how we evolve. It's how we become who we're meant to be. Don't tolerate stagnation. Honor the call to transformation. 14. They never tolerate disconnection from the unconscious. Here's something most people don't understand. Jung believed that the unconscious isn't just a dumping ground for repressed material. It's a source of wisdom, creativity, and guidance. The problem with modern life, we've become so dominated by rational, left-brain thinking that we've lost connection to the unconscious realm, the realm of dreams, intuition, imagination, and symbols. Jung's warning. He said, the unconscious is not merely a forgotten or repressed memory, but a living system which reacts to and compensates the conscious situation. In other words, your unconscious is trying to guide you, but most people aren't listening. How disconnection shows up. Dismissing dreams as just random. Ignoring intuitive hits. Living purely in logic and rationality. Avoiding creative expression. Numbing out with constant distraction. The spiritually mature approach. They maintain an active relationship with their unconscious through dream work, recording and analyzing dreams for messages, active imagination, dialoguing with inner figures and symbols, creative expression, art, writing, music as ways to access the unconscious, synchronicity awareness, noticing meaningful coincidences, intuition honoring, trusting gut feelings. Why this matters? Your unconscious knows things your conscious mind doesn't. It sees patterns you're blind to. It holds solutions you haven't considered. It's guiding you toward individuation. The practice. Start a dream journal. Keep it by your bed. The moment you wake up, write down whatever you remember, no matter how weird or fragmented. Do this for 30 days and notice what emerges. You'll be amazed at the wisdom your unconscious is offering. Jung said, who looks outside dreams. Who looks inside awakes. It's time to wake up to the wisdom within. 15. They never tolerate living without meaning. We've arrived at the ultimate boundary, the one that encompasses everything else. Jung's core belief. He said the least of things with a meaning is worth more in life than the greatest of things without it. Spiritually mature people simply will not tolerate a meaningless existence. What is meaning? It's not happiness. It's not comfort. It's